The old man's hands trembled as he worked the knife across the pine block. Not from weakness. At 90 years old, Isaac Mackenzie Bridger still rose before dawn, still tended the horses, still walked the fence line of the ranch that sprawled across 300 acres of Colorado grassland. The trembling came from memory, from reaching back through 7 decades to a December day in Montana when the world was frozen and hope was a commodity he could not afford. His grandson David sat beside him on the porch, baseball glove in his lap, 16 years old, and full of questions the way boys that age always are. The Rocky Mountains rose behind them, purple in the late afternoon light. July heat hung thick in the air, but Isaac was elsewhere. Isaac was in the cold. "Grandpa, why did you take the Bridger name? Dad said you were born a Mackenzie." The knife stopped moving. Isaac looked toward the mountains, seeing different peaks. Higher peaks. Montana peaks from another lifetime. Because the man who saved our family deserved to be remembered. When I was 17 years old, the same age you are now, I stood on an auction platform in Montana territory and watched my mother be rejected by 47 men. David's eyes widened. Auction. Like what kind of auction? The mail-order bride kind. December 1883, 2 years after my father died in a factory accident back in Boston. My mother had no money, no options, and 7 children who needed to eat through a Montana winter. She signed a contract. $100 for a train ticket west and a husband she'd never met. The boy leaned forward. Isaac could see him doing the math, trying to imagine a world where women were traded like cattle, where desperation wore a price tag. The auction house was at the Copper Bluff train station. Temperature was 5 below zero. Wind came down off Thunder Ridge like the breath of something cruel and ancient. My mother stood on that wooden platform with all 7 of us huddled behind her, and one by one those 47 men walked past. Each one looked at her. Each one counted us children. Each one turned away. "Why?" Isaac set down the knife in the half-carved piece of wood. "Because my mother was what they called a large woman. Because she had 7 mouths to feed instead of 1 or 2. Because in 1883, a woman's worth was measured by the space she didn't take up, and my mother took up space. She was tall, she was broad, she was strong in all the ways the world told her she should be weak. That's horrible. It was honest, and sometimes honest is more horrible than lies." Isaac picked up the carving again, hands finding the familiar rhythm. 47 rejections. I counted every one. Stood there at 17 holding my 9-year-old brother's hand, trying not to let him see me shake. Not from the cold, David. From rage. The boy waited. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. A hawk circled overhead, lazy in the heat. The world moved on the way it always did, indifferent to the stories that shaped it. And then a giant stepped out of the crowd. David's breath caught. A giant. 6'4" in an age when most men stood 5'8", shoulders broad enough to block out the winter sun. Beard black shot through with silver, thick and wild, like he'd never known a barber's touch. He wore an animal hide coat, scarred and weathered, and his face bore a mark that ran from cheekbone to jaw. They called him Thunder Ridge Bridger. Said he'd killed a grizzly with his bare hands. Said he'd lived alone on the mountain for 12 years, hadn't come down to civilization in 3. Said he was mad, completely mad. Was he? Isaac smiled. It was a sad smile, the kind that held ghosts. He was grieving, which to some folks looks the same as madness. But on that December day, he walked through the crowd of men who'd rejected my mother, and in a voice that carried across that frozen square, like thunder itself, he said words I'll never forget as long as I live. What did he say? He said, "I'll take the fat one and every last one of her children." The silence that followed held weight. David absorbed it, this piece of family history that suddenly made the ranch make sense, made the hyphenated name on the deed make sense, made everything about who they were and where they came from click into place. That man was Jonah Bridger. He paid $500 in gold coins for my mother when the standard bride price was $100. He took all 7 of us to a cabin on Thunder Ridge. And what happened next changed everything. Not just for our family, but for the entire Montana territory. What happened? Isaac stood slowly, joints protesting, but still functional. He walked to the porch railing, looking out at land that 3 generations had worked. A war happened, David. A quiet war fought with words and courage, and the kind of love that sees worth where the world sees burden. A war over silver, over land, over whether a desperate man's crimes could be forgiven when motivated by a dying woman's hope. He turned back to his grandson. This story you need to remember, because one day you'll tell it to your children. That's how we survive. Not through money or property, but through the stories of courage we pass down. David nodded solemn. I'm listening. Good, because this isn't a simple story. There are no perfect heroes, no purely evil villains, only people. Frightened, desperate people who were brave enough to stand when everything was falling apart. Isaac moved back to his chair, settling into it with a sigh. Now let me tell you about the winter of 1883 when a rejected Wittedumfo and a mountain hermit built something worth fighting for. The old man closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was 17, once more standing on frozen wood, watching his mother's humiliation, feeling winter bite through inadequate clothes. The transition was seamless. The memory was that strong. It started with 47 rejections, and it ended with a legacy that's standing here talking to you today. Part 1, the choosing the auction of broken dreams. The platform creaked under Ruth Mackenzie's weight. She heard it, that familiar groan of wood that had followed her all her life. The sound of taking up too much space. The sound of being too much. Behind her, 7 children pressed close. Isaac, 17 and rigid with barely contained fury. Samuel, 15, clutching a book he'd read 3 times on the train west because familiar words were safer than unfamiliar futures. Nathan, 13, his hands balled into fists. Elias, 11, silent as always but seeing everything. Jacob, 9, vibrating with nervous energy he couldn't name. Abigail, 7, trying to be brave for Esther, who at 4 years old didn't understand why Mama was crying, even though Mama's eyes were dry. The train had arrived in Copper Bluff 6 hours ago, 6 hours in December, Montana cold that cut through wool and flesh straight into bone, 6 hours watching other women be chosen. Younger women, smaller women. Women with narrow waists and hopeful smiles and 1 or 2 children at most. Ruth was none of those things. She was 34 years old and looked older. 2 years as a widow aged a woman faster than 10 years of marriage. She was tall, 5 feet 9 inches in a time when 5 feet 4 was considered statuesque. She was broad across the shoulders, broad across the hips, broad everywhere that polite society whispered women should be narrow. She had given birth to 7 children and her body showed it. Stretch marks, sagging breasts. A belly that had never quite flattened after Esther. The world had spent her entire life telling her she was too much. Today, 47 men were about to prove it. Clayton Ashford stood at the edge of the platform, consulting his ledger, with the casual certainty of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. He was the regional manager for the mail-order bride agency, a position that sounded official and felt like slave trading. His coat was fine wool, his boots polished, his mustache waxed into points. He smiled when he worked, but his eyes stayed cold. Next, he called out, pen poised above paper, Ruth Mackenzie, widow of Thomas Mackenzie, deceased November 1881 in factory accident, age 34. His eyes traveled down her body, slow, deliberate, the assessment she'd endured 1,000 times before, the math being done behind cold eyes, too wide, too heavy, too much children, 7 offspring, ages 4 to 17, departure from Boston, Massachusetts, transport costs $100 paid by the agency, and to be reimbursed by the selecting gentleman. The crowd behind Ruth stirred. Whispers rose like smoke in the bitter air. 7. Lord have mercy, she's been busy. No wonder she's built like a barn. Ruth's spine straightened. She had learned long ago that hunching made no difference. She was what she was, a large woman who'd buried a husband and kept 7 children alive on nothing but will and calloused hands. Step to the side, Mrs. Mackenzie. Clayton waved his pen dismissively. We'll see if anyone is interested. She moved to where the other women had stood before being claimed, but there was no one to stand with now. The 9 others who'd made the journey were gone, led away to warm houses and waiting suppers and men who'd looked at them and seen possibility. Ruth stood alone. The selection began. A rancher approached first. Tall man, weathered face, kind eyes. He tipped his hat politely, and Ruth felt a flutter of hope. But his gaze moved past her to the children clustered behind, and she watched him count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The hope died as his expression changed. Ma'am, I wish you well, but I run cattle, not an orphanage. He walked away. A miner came next, shorter, stockier clothes that smelled of rock dust and sweat. He didn't even make it to the platform before shaking his head. I need a wife who can work, not a woman who's already worn out from carrying half the state of Massachusetts. Laughter rippled through the watching men. Number 3, number 7, number 12. They blurred together. Each rejection unique in its cruelty, but identical in its outcome. 7 kids, I can't feed 7 kids. You're a handsome woman, but that's too much. How old did you say? 34. I need someone who can give me my own children, not raise someone else's army. By rejection, 20. Ruth's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her worn skirt, trying to steal them. Isaac stood behind her like a sentinel, and she could feel the rage radiating off him in waves. Ma, he whispered, we don't have to do this. Yes, we do. I can work. I can provide. You're 17, Isaac. She didn't look at him. Couldn't. If she saw the shame in his eyes, she might break. You can't feed 6 mouths and yourself through a Montana winter. Neither can you, not alone. The truth of it sat between them, heavy and undeniable. Number 30, number 35, 40. The December cold crept through Ruth's thin coat, through her flesh, into her bones. Still she stood. Still she waited. Still no one came. By rejection, 45. Clayton Ashford was openly smirking. He consulted his pocket watch with theatrical boredom. Well, gentlemen, it appears we have unsold inventory, 1 widow generously proportioned, 7 children of various ages and usefulness. The agency will, of course, require repayment for transportation costs. Shall we discuss alternative arrangements? Ruth's blood went cold. She knew what alternative arrangements meant. She'd seen it in Boston. Women indebted to companies working off passage in factories. In places worse than factories. Children separated and sent to orphanages or bound out as servants to whoever would pay the fee. No. The word came out stronger than she felt. Clayton's eyes sharpened. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the pomade in his hair, the tobacco on his breath. You can't. I'm afraid you don't have that luxury, Mrs. Mackenzie. You signed a contract. You agreed to marry a man in Montana territory. If no man will have you, the debt remains, and debts must be paid. I'll work. I'll work it off. With 7 children in tow, who would hire you? His smile widened, showing teeth. No, I think we'll need to discuss more creative solutions. The older boy looks strong, perhaps an apprenticeship with the lumber mill. The girls could find placement in respectable homes. They're young enough to be trained properly. Behind Ruth Abigail's small voice, Mama, are they going to take us away? No, baby. Ruth pulled her daughter close, pulled all of them close, a desperate circle of arms and fear. No one is taking you anywhere. But she didn't know how to stop it. She didn't know how to fight a man like Clayton with his contracts and his lawyers and his cold smile. She was just a fat widow from Boston with nothing but her children and her stubborn heart. Well, Clayton said, straightening his coat, perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere more private. My office is just across the square. He reached for Ruth's arm, and that's when the voice came. Give me the fat one. Everything stopped. The words rolled across the square like thunder from a distant mountain. Deep, resonant, commanding in a way that bypassed thought and went straight to the hindbrain, where prey animals recognize predators. The crowd parted, not politely, not gradually. They scattered like chickens before a wolf pressing back against buildings and wagons, creating as much distance as possible between themselves and the source of that voice. Ruth turned. He stood at the edge of the square, and stood was insufficient for what he did. He occupied space the way a mountain occupied the horizon. Inevitable, immovable, ancient, tall. Dear God, so tall. The man had to be 6.5 feet, though. Later, she'd learn it was only 6'4". But in that moment, with the winter sun behind him and the crowd shrinking away, he looked like something carved from the mountain itself. Shoulders broad enough to block out light, arms thick as most men's legs. a chest that strained against the animal hide coat he wore. That coat was patched and scarred, stitched with sinew in places clearly made by the wearer's own hands from animals he'd killed himself. His beard was black, shot through with gray, thick and wild, reaching halfway down his chest. His hair fell past his shoulders, pulled back with a leather cord but still untamed. And his face. A scar ran from his left cheekbone down to his jaw. Not a neat surgical line, but a ragged tear, the kind left by claws or broken glass, or violence too sudden to be avoided. It pulled his mouth slightly askew, giving him a permanent expression somewhere between a scowl and a snarl. But his eyes were gray, the gray of storm clouds gathering, the gray of slate, the gray of smoke, and they were fixed directly on Ruth with an intensity that made her breath catch. Around them, the whispers started. That's Bridger. Jonah Bridger. Thunder Ridge Bridger. Sweet Jesus, he came down from the mountain. Hasn't been to town in 3 years. I heard he killed a grizzly with his bare hands. I heard he's mad, completely mad. I heard he eats raw meat and howls at the moon. The man called Bridger paid the whispers no attention. He walked forward, each step deliberate, his boots striking the frozen ground with the rhythm of a heartbeat, heavy, steady, inexorable. The crowd shrank back further. Even Clayton Ashford had gone pale, though he recovered quickly, professional smile snapping into place like a mask. Mr. Bridger, what an unexpected pleasure. Jonah Bridger didn't look at him. His eyes hadn't left Ruth's face. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. This man, this legend, this monster they whispered about was staring at her like she was the only person in the square. Like her size didn't register. Like her 7 children clinging to her skirts didn't matter. Like he saw her. How much? His voice was lower now, quieter. But somehow it carried to every corner of the silent square. Clayton blinked. I'm sorry, Bob. How much? Each word fell like a stone into still water. For the woman and all her children. Mr. Bridger, surely you don't mean there are younger women more suitable candidates. I didn't ask for advice. The temperature of Jonah's voice dropped to something dangerous. I asked how much. Clayton swallowed. Ruth could see his throat work. The standard bride price is $100, but given the circumstances, the additional passengers, the transportation costs, Jonah reached into his coat. He produced a leather pouch that landed on Clayton's ledger with a heavy clink. Gold coins spilled across the pages, catching the weak winter light and throwing it back in yellow flashes. 500. The crowd gasped. $500. 5 times the standard price. More money than most men in Montana saw in 2 years. Clayton's hand darted toward the gold, then stopped. His eyes narrowed, the merchant in him suddenly suspicious of anything that seemed too good. Mr. Bridger, I must ask, what interest could you possibly have in this particular woman? At last, Jonah turned to face him. The movement was slow, deliberate, and somehow more threatening than any shout could have been. That ain't your concern. But surely, the children are part of the deal. Jonah's jaw tightened, all 7 of them. The tall, angry one, the one with the book, the fighter, the quiet one with the eyes, the one who never stops talking, the little mother, and the baby. He'd named them. Ruth's heart stuttered. This stranger had looked at her children for all of 30 seconds, and he'd identified each one, seen them, categorized them not as burdens, but as individuals. They're hers, Jonah continued. That makes them mine. You got a problem with that. Clayton's face had gone from pale to red to an unhealthy gray. No problem at all, Mr. Bridger. Good. Jonah turned back to Ruth. For the first time, they were face to face with nothing between them but cold air and possibility. Ma'am. She stared at him. Every instinct screamed warnings. This man was dangerous, unpredictable, a stranger who lived alone on a mountain and inspired fear in everyone who spoke his name. She knew nothing about him except rumors and legends, and neither were trustworthy. But there was something in his eyes, something that didn't match the legend, a steadiness, a certainty, and beneath that loneliness so deep it had its own gravity. She recognized loneliness. It had been her constant companion for 2 years. Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. Why me? Jonah's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind those storm gray eyes. Because you're still standing. Ruth blinked. 47 men looked at you like you were nothing. His voice was quiet now, meant only for her. 47 rejections. Your children are scared and cold and hungry. That man there just threatened to take them from you. Any other woman would be crying, begging, but you're standing there with your spine straight and your eyes dry, ready to fight him barehanded if you had to. He paused. I know what that costs. That kind of strength. Ruth's throat closed. No one had ever called her strong. Big, yes. Heavy, certainly. But strong, the word felt foreign. I ain't offering you love, ma'am. Jonah's honesty was blunt as a hammer. I ain't offering you fairy tales. I got a cabin up on Thunder Ridge. It's warm and it's solid and there's food enough for all of you. But it's isolated, snowed in half the year, hard living. He met her eyes directly. But your children would be safe, fed, kept together. And no man would ever look at you like that again, while I draw breath. Behind Ruth, a small voice. Esther, 4 years old, tugging on her skirt. Mama is the bear, man, going to be our new papa. Ruth didn't know if she laughed or sobbed, perhaps both. She looked at her children. Isaac suspicious and protective. Samuel evaluating with his sharp mind. Nathan ready to bolt or fight, whichever came first. Elias silent and watchful as always. Jacob barely containing questions that bubbled up like springs. Abigail holding Esther's hand, trying so hard to be brave. And Esther herself, 4 years old, staring up at the giant with curiosity instead of fear. Ruth looked at Clayton, still clutching his ledger, still calculating ways to profit from her desperation even now. She looked at Jonah, this mountain of a man who had paid 5 times her worth and asked for nothing but the chance to give her children a home. Mrs. Mackenzie, his voice softened slightly. I'm asking, not taking. The choice is yours. The choice. When had anyone ever given her a choice? Men had told her what to do her entire life. Her father, her husband, factory foremen, landlords. Men like Clayton who saw women as property to be bought and sold and used. But this man, this giant, who could probably break her in half without effort, was standing here asking. Ruth Mackenzie drew a breath of frozen Montana air. She straightened her shoulders, and she made the decision that would change everything. My name is Ruth, she said, and if you're taking us, you should know my children are loud, messy, and they eat like locusts. The boys fight constantly. The girls chatter from dawn to dusk, and I snore. Something happened to Jonah's face. It took Ruth a moment to realize it was the beginning of a smile. Just the corners of his mouth barely visible through all that beard. But it was there. Reckon I can handle that. And I cook with too much salt. I like salt. And I won't be bullied, Mr. Bridger. Not by Clayton, not by any man, and not by you. The almost smile grew slightly. I'd be disappointed if you were. Ruth turned to her children. Get your things. We're going. Isaac grabbed her arm. Ma, you can't be serious. We don't know this man. No, we don't. She met her son's eyes steadily. But I know Clayton. I know what happens to families who can't pay their debts. And I know that man just spent $500 to keep us together. $500, Isaac. And asked for nothing but my name. She put her hand over his. Sometimes we have to take the leap. Sometimes the only way forward is through the unknown. Isaac's jaw tightened. He looked at Jonah, really looked, measuring and assessing the way 17-year-old boys do when they're trying to become men faster than biology allows. Jonah met his gaze without flinching. For a long moment they stood there. The boy who'd been the man of his family for 2 years and the man who was offering to take that burden from his shoulders. Finally, Isaac spoke. You're taking all of us, all 7, and you'll treat my mother right, with respect, always. And if you don't, there was challenge in Isaac's voice, threat, even though they both knew the boy was no physical match for the mountain man. Then you'll have my permission to shoot me. Jonah's face was dead serious. I got a spare rifle. I'll teach you how to use it. And if I ever raise a hand to your mother in anger, you put a bullet in me. Deal. Isaac blinked. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't that. He looked at Ruth, searching her face for guidance. She nodded. Just once. Deal, Isaac said quietly. Jonah turned back to the platform where Clayton still stood, gold coins gathered in his greedy hands. We done here. I'll need to file the paperwork, but yes, Mr. Bridger, the transaction is complete. Mrs. Mackenzie is legally bound to marry you within 30 days or the contract is void. And I understand contracts. Good day, Mr. Ashford. It wasn't quite a dismissal, but it was close. Clayton's face purpled, but he was too smart to push. Too smart to antagonize a man who just handed him $500 in gold and who had a reputation for violence that might or might not be exaggerated. The crowd parted as Jonah led Ruth and her children toward his wagon. She heard the whispers following them, sharp and incredulous. He's really taking her. All 7 children. The man's lost his mind. She'll kill him in his sleep and take the silver. What's silver? You ain't heard. They say there's silver up on Thunder Ridge. That's why he never leaves, sitting on a fortune. Ruth filed that away for later. Right now, all that mattered was getting her children safely out of Copper Bluff and away from Clayton Ashford's cold calculations. The wagon was massive, built for hauling supplies up mountain roads pulled by 2 draft horses that had to weigh a ton each. Jonah helped Esther up first, lifting her easily with one massive hand. The little girl giggled. Little, you really are a bear man. Esther, Abigail hissed, don't be rude. But Jonah's eyes crinkled slightly. I've been called worse, little miss. He lifted Abigail in next and turned to Ruth. She hesitated. The wagon was high, the step was far from the ground. In Boston, she'd always struggled with such things, her weight making her clumsy, her size making her a spectacle. Jonah simply offered his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cold. He didn't yank her upward or strain with effort. He guided her into the wagon as if she weighed nothing at all, as if lifting a full-grown woman was no more difficult than lifting a child. It was such a small thing, such a tiny kindness. Ruth felt tears prick her eyes and ruthlessly forced them back. The boys climbed in on their own, arranging themselves among the supplies Jonah had brought. Isaac sat at the back, positioning himself between his family and the town, still watchful, still protective. Samuel found a corner where he could observe everything. Nathan fidgeted until Elias elbowed him quiet. Jacob immediately began examining the contents of every barrel within reach. Don't touch that! Jonah's voice came without heat. Bear traps. Jacob's hand froze mid-reach. He looked up at Jonah with new respect mixed with healthy fear. Jonah climbed onto the driver's seat and took up the reins. The 2 enormous draft horses stamped their hooves, breath steaming in the cold air. The wagon creaked as it began to move, wheels crunching over frozen ground. Ruth looked back once. Clayton stood on the platform, still holding his ledger. His expression was unreadable. But as the wagon pulled away, she saw him turn to speak with a well-dressed man beside him, saw their eyes follow the wagon, saw them begin to plan. She faced forward. Whatever came next, she would face it standing. Jonah guided the horses onto the north road toward the mountains that loomed white against the gray sky. Massive peaks that looked like they could crush anything that challenged them. 3 days, he said. Weather holds, we'll make the cabin before the big snows come. And if the weather doesn't hold, Jonah glanced at her. That almost smile flickered again. Then we make do. That's what folks do up here, Mrs. Mackenzie. We make do. Ruth looked at her children huddled together under blankets Jonah had provided. She looked at the mountains rising ahead, vast and indifferent and terrifying. She looked at the man beside her, this stranger who had claimed her for reasons she still didn't fully understand. Ruth, she said quietly, you paid $500 for me. The least you can do is use my name. Jonah was silent for a moment. Then Jonah. But most call me by my last name. Bridger. Jonah. She tested it. And what should my children call you? He considered. Whatever they're comfortable with. I ain't their father. Won't pretend to be. But I'll keep them safe. Teach them what I can. That's the deal. Ruth nodded slowly. It wasn't love. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was honest. And after 2 years of struggling alone, after a lifetime of pretty lies about how things would get better, honesty felt like a gift. The deal, she agreed. The wagon rolled on, carrying them away from the town that had rejected them toward a mountain no one else would climb. Behind them, Copper Bluff disappeared into the falling snow that had just begun. Soft flakes at first, but Ruth could see the clouds building. A storm was coming. She didn't know it yet, but storms on Thunder Ridge were different from storms anywhere else. They were louder, more violent. They shook the mountain to its bones and tested everything built upon it. And this family, thrown together by desperation in gold coins, was about to face their first test. In the back of the wagon, little Esther tugged on Abigail's sleeve. "I like the bear, man," she whispered. "He's got kind eyes." Abigail looked at the broad back of the man driving them into the wilderness. She wasn't sure what she saw there, danger or safety, threat or promise. But she squeezed her baby sister's hand and whispered back, "Maybe. We'll see." The snow fell harder. The wagon climbed higher. And behind them in Copper Bluff, Clayton Ashford watched until they disappeared. Then he smiled, because rejected widows and mountain hermits didn't understand what he understood. That silver was worth more than sentiment. That land was worth more than lives. That some wars weren't fought with guns, but with lawyers and sheriffs and the kind of patience only wealthy men could afford. Let them have their cabin. Let them have their first night of hope. Winter was long on Thunder Ridge, and Clayton Ashford was a patient man. He had time. The journey deepens. The wagon climbed for hours. The road, if it could be called that, was little more than frozen ruts carved by previous travelers, winding back and forth across the mountain's face like a scar that refused to heal. Snow fell steadily now, not the gentle flakes of late afternoon, but the determined march of a storm that had business to finish. Ruth watched the landscape change. The scattered buildings of Copper Bluff had given way to dense pine forest trees, so tall and straight they looked like pillars holding up the gray sky. Then the pines thinned, and they were climbing above the tree line into country where only scrub brush and exposed rock could survive. The children had fallen quiet. Even Jacob, who normally couldn't stop talking, had run out of questions. The altitude was making them drowsy. That and the shock of everything that had happened in the last 6 hours. Isaac remained alert, watching Jonah's back with an intensity that bordered on hostile. Ruth understood. Her eldest son had been the man of their family for 2 years. He'd made decisions, rationed food, stood between his mother and landlords, demanding rent she couldn't pay. And now a stranger had taken that burden from him with nothing but $500 in gold. It should have been relief. Instead, it felt like theft. Samuel had pulled out his book again, but he wasn't reading. His eyes tracked the trail behind them, the snow already filling in their wagon tracks, erasing evidence they'd ever passed this way. "Mr. Bridger," Samuel said. His voice was careful, scholarly, the voice of a boy who'd learned that knowledge was power and questions were weapons if used correctly. "Jonah. Jonah, how long have you lived on Thunder Ridge?" 12 years. Alone? A pause. "Not always." Samuel waited, but Jonah didn't elaborate. The boy tried a different angle. "Is there a school nearby?" "No, nearest school's in Copper Bluff. Too far for daily travel, especially in winter." Ruth saw her son's face fall. Samuel loved learning the way some boys loved hunting or fighting. Books were his refuge. The thought of being cut off from education clearly pained him. "But I got books." Jonah's voice was gruff, but there was something underneath. Something that might have been understanding. "Cabin's got a whole wall of them. History, science, literature, maps. My wife collected them before she passed. She was a teacher. Said a man's education shouldn't stop just because there ain't a schoolhouse nearby." Samuel's head snapped up. "Your wife was a teacher. Best one Montana ever saw, according to folks who knew her." Would it be all right if I read them?" "They ain't doing anyone good sitting on shelves." For the first time since Boston, Samuel smiled. Really smiled. Ruth felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Nathan predictably had different concerns. "Can you teach me to shoot?" "Nathan," Ruth's voice sharpened, "this isn't the time." "Why not? Pa was going to teach me before he—" The boy stopped. The unfinished sentence hung in the cold air like frozen breath. Thomas Mackenzie had promised many things. A bigger house, a better life, time. He'd promised time, and the factory accident had taken it all. Jonah glanced back at the 13-year-old. "Your pa teach you anything before he passed?" Nathan shook his head, jaw tight. "Then I'll teach you. Rifle, traps, tracking. A man should know how to provide." There was no sentimentality in Jonah's voice, just fact. But you learn safety first. You learn respect for the weapon. And if I ever catch you handling a gun careless, you won't touch one again till you're grown. Understood. Nathan's eyes went wide. Then he nodded vigorously. Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. Makes me feel old. You are old, Jacob piped up from his nest of blankets. Jacob, Ruth hissed. But Jonah made a sound that might have been a laugh. Boy's got a point. The children relaxed slightly. Even Isaac's rigid posture softened just a fraction. It was Elias who asked the question Ruth had been dreading. The quiet one. The observer. 11 years old and so often overlooked between his louder brothers that Ruth sometimes forgot he was there. But Elias saw everything, and now his soft voice cut through the creaking of the wagon. Why do they call it Thunder Ridge? The temperature seemed to drop. Jonah's hands tightened on the reins. Ruth saw it, the tension that ran through his massive frame like a current. Elias, she started, maybe now isn't... It's all right, Jonah's voice was flat, empty. Boy asked a fair question. He didn't speak for a long moment. The horses plodded on their breasts, steaming in the cold air. Snow continued to fall heavier now. Ruth could feel the storm building. After my wife and son died, I wasn't right in the head for a while. Grief does that, makes you into something you don't recognize. Jonah's words came slowly, like he was pulling them up from somewhere deep and dark. I went up the mountain and I didn't come down for almost 2 years. People in town started telling stories. Said I'd gone wild. Said I killed a grizzly with my bare hands. Fought off a pack of wolves. Lived like an animal. Did you? Jacob asked breathlessly. The grizzly, I mean. The grizzly was real, but I had a knife, not bare hands. And I didn't fight it by choice. It came at me, and I did what I had to do. Jonah's jaw worked. The rest is just stories. People fear what they don't understand, and they don't understand a man who chooses solitude over society. But why Thunder Ridge? Elias persisted quietly. Silence. Ruth thought Jonah wouldn't answer. Then, because the cabin's built on the ridge, and when storms come, the thunder echoes off the rocks so loud you can feel it in your bones. My wife named it Rachel. She said it was like living inside God's own drum. His voice roughened. After she died, folks started calling me by the mountain's name. Reckon they thought it suited a man who'd turned himself to stone. Elias considered this with his usual solemnity. Then, do you still feel like stone? Ruth's breath caught. Leave it to her quietest son to ask the question that mattered most. Jonah turned slightly, meeting the boy's eyes. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. The understanding of one quiet soul for another. Less than I used to, Jonah said. Ask me again in a month. Elias nodded, satisfied. The wagon rolled on. The storm closed in, the storm's fury. They made camp as darkness fell, not at the cabin. Jonah explained they were still 6 hours out, and traveling mountain roads at night in a snowstorm was how people died. Better to stop, make shelter, survive till dawn. He chose a hollow between 2 ridges, some protection from the wind, he said. Ruth helped the children down from the wagon, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. The cold bit through her coat immediately. This wasn't Boston cold. This was something else. Something that wanted to kill you. Jonah moved with practiced efficiency. Fire built before full dark. Horses watered and fed before the humans. Bedrolls laid out for the children before he even sat down. Ruth watched him work, trying to understand what she'd agreed to. This man who'd bought her freedom, who'd paid 5 times her value, who moved through the wilderness like he was part of it. You going to stand there all night? His voice startled her. I was going to help with supper. Already done. He gestured to the fire where a pot of beans bubbled. You and the young ones need to eat and sleep. Long day tomorrow. Ruth bristled. I'm not helpless, Mr. Bridger. Jonah, and I know you ain't helpless. He looked at her, then really looked, and she saw no condescension in those storm-gray eyes. Only exhaustion and something else. Something that might have been respect. I saw that the moment you stood on that platform with your spine straight, while 47 cowards walked past. He stirred the beans slowly. But you've been carrying the load alone for 2 years. Maybe tonight you don't have to. Ruth's throat tightened. She sat down by the fire without another word. The children ate in near silence, too tired and overwhelmed for their usual chatter. Even Jacob managed only a few bites before his eyes drooped. Esther fell asleep with her spoon still in her hand. Ruth gathered her youngest into her lap, wiping beans from the little girl's cheek. When she looked up, she found Jonah watching her. "She looks like you," he said quietly. "She looks like her father. Same chin, same stubborn streak. Is that where she gets it from, the stubborn?" Ruth almost smiled, almost. "Thomas always said I could out-stubborn a mule." "Thomas, your husband?" "Yes." Jonah nodded slowly. He didn't offer condolences, didn't say the empty words people always said. He simply acknowledged the name and let the silence hold space for grief. It was Ruth realized exactly the right thing. The storm hit just after midnight. Ruth woke to screaming wind and the terrified cries of her children. The canvas shelter Jonah had rigged was tearing loose, whipping in the gale like a wounded bird. "Mama, Mama," Esther's voice high and panicked. Ruth struggled upright, fighting the blankets the wind had torn loose. Snow drove horizontal, stinging her face like needles. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." She gathered Esther against her chest, reaching for Abigail with her other arm. The older girl was crying too, her usual composure shattered by the violence of the storm. "Where's Jonah?" Isaac shouted over the wind. "He went to check the horse. They're panicking." A crack of thunder so loud it shook the ground. Esther screamed. The storm wasn't just loud. It was something alive and angry trying to tear them from the mountain's face. "Everyone to me," Ruth bellowed, using the voice she'd developed for calling children across Boston streets. "Boys, get your sisters and come to me now." They came, 7 children stumbling through snow and wind, drawn by the sound of their mother's voice. Ruth wrapped her arms around as many as she could reach, trying to shield them with her body. "We need shelter," Samuel shouted. "The tent's tearing apart." He was right. The canvas was shredding pieces, flying off into the darkness. Then Jonah was there. He emerged from the storm like a mountain made flesh, his coat plastered with snow, his beard crusted with ice. Without a word, he scooped Esther from Ruth's arms and grabbed Abigail with his other hand. "Follow me. There's a rock overhang 20 yards east." Ruth didn't hesitate. She grabbed Nathan and Elias, shouting for the older boys to follow. They stumbled through the blinding snow, Jonah leading them by the sound of his voice alone. Ruth couldn't see 3 feet ahead, couldn't see anything but white and more white. Then darkness. The overhang was barely more than a crack in the mountainside, but it blocked the worst of the wind. Jonah pushed the children inside first, then Ruth, then squeezed his massive frame in last, using his body to shield the opening. They huddled together in the darkness, panting, soaked, terrified. "Is everyone here?" Ruth's voice cracked. "Count off. Isaac here. Samuel here. Nathan here. Elias here." Silence. Ruth's heart stopped. "Jacob." "Nothing." "Jacob, answer me right now." "Here, Ma." His voice came from somewhere near her left elbow. "I was counting to myself. Did you know you can count to 100 between lightning and thunder to tell how far?" "Jacob Matthew Mackenzie, this is not the time." "Sorry, Ma." Ruth sagged with relief. 7. All 7, safe. She became aware gradually that Esther was no longer crying. The little girl was pressed against Jonah's chest, her face buried in his coat, her small hands clutching the animal hide as if it were a lifeline. And Jonah was holding her. Not awkwardly, not reluctantly. He held her the way a father holds a frightened child. Secure, certain, gentle. One massive hand cupped the back of her head. His rough voice murmured something too low for Ruth to hear. Whatever he said, it worked. Esther's trembling eased, her breathing slowed. Within minutes, impossibly, she was asleep. Ruth stared at this man, who claimed to have turned himself to stone. This man who hadn't held a child in 12 years. But here he was, cradling her daughter like she was precious, like she mattered. He looked up and caught her watching. Neither of them spoke. But something shifted in that frozen darkness. Something Ruth couldn't name but felt in her chest like the first thaw of spring. The storm raged for hours. Ruth dozed fitfully, wedged between Samuel and Nathan, too cold and uncomfortable for true sleep. But every time she woke, she saw Jonah in the same position, back against the rock. Esther cradled against him, eyes watching the darkness. guarding them. When dawn finally broke pale and watery, the storm had passed. They crawled out of the overhang to find the world transformed. Snow lay 2 feet deep, covering the wagon, the supplies, everything. The horses! Isaac's voice held panic. But Jonah was already moving. He waded through snow to where he'd tied the animals. Moments later, Ruth heard him speak. Easy, girl. Easy now. Storms passed. The horses were alive. Cold. Frightened. But alive. Jonah had tied them in the lee of a rock formation, had covered them with blankets from his own pack. He had known. He had prepared. Ruth walked to where he was checking the animal's legs for injury. You saved us. Just did what needed doing. You could have left us in the tent. Could have just saved yourself and the horses. Now he looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, his face raw from wind and cold. But his voice was steady. I made a deal, Ruth. You and your children for $500 and my word. Money can be stolen. Word can't. She didn't know what to say, so she said the only thing that felt true. Thank you. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and turned back to the horses. We need to move. Snow's deep, but it'll get worse. Another day's travel if we push hard. The fortress home. They reached the cabin as the sun began to set. Well, Abigail saw it first. Mama, look. Ruth stopped, looked up, and felt her heart stop with her. It wasn't a cabin. It was a fortress, built of massive pine logs 2 stories tall, with a stone chimney that climbed the side like a spine. The logs were easily 2 feet thick at their narrowest point, fitted together with such precision that Ruth couldn't see gaps between them. The roof was steep, designed to shed snow. Windows were shuttered, with heavy wood bars visible even from a distance. This wasn't a home. It was a stronghold, a place built to survive anything the mountain could throw at it, and smoke curled from the chimney, soft and gray against the white sky. You left a fire burning, Ruth asked. Banked coals, keeps the pipes from freezing. Jonah guided the horses up the final slope. Built the cabin to last. Got to maintain it proper or it ain't worth having. They reached the porch as darkness fell. The door was massive. Oak from the look of it, reinforced with iron straps. It swung open on oiled hinges. Warmth rushed out to meet them. Ruth stepped inside and felt tears spring to her eyes. It wasn't just warm, it was beautiful. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall. Flames licked at fresh logs Jonah must have laid before he'd left. Real rugs covered the plank floor. Thick, soft, woven with patterns Ruth couldn't identify. A long table stood beneath windows, chairs enough for 10. And books. Shelves and shelves of books as lining the walls, their spines gleaming in the firelight. Oh, Samuel breathed. Oh my. Jacob ran to the window. You can see forever. Elias stood in the doorway, turning slowly, taking in every detail with his artist's eyes. But it was Esther who spoke for all of them. Mama, her small voice held wonder. Is this home now? Ruth looked at the fire, at the books, at her children's faces lit with something she hadn't seen in 2 years. Hope. Yes, baby. Her voice broke. This is home now. Jonah stood apart, watching them discover the space he had built for a family that had died. His face was unreadable, but his hands, Ruth noticed, were trembling slightly. She crossed to him. It's beautiful. Rachel would be proud. He swallowed hard, nodded once, and turned away before she could see whatever was in his eyes. Bedrooms are upstairs, 4 of them. Boys can double up. Girls too. Ruth, you take the big room at the end of the hall. Where will you sleep? I got a room off the kitchen. Always have. Ruth should have argued, should have insisted on helping, on proving she wasn't helpless. But exhaustion dragged at every bone, and her children were already scattering through the cabin like puppies exploring new territory. So she simply said, Thank you, Jonah. He paused, his back still to her. You already thanked me. I'll probably thank you again tomorrow, and the day after. You'll have to get used to it. She saw his shoulders shake slightly. It might have been a laugh. Stubborn woman. You knew that when you bought me. Now he did turn, and there was definitely something like amusement in those gray eyes. Reckon I did. Part 2. The testing learning the mountain. The first week on Thunder Ridge passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. The children adapted with the resilience Only the young possess finding their places in this new world, like water finding cracks in stone. Samuel claimed the corner by the bookshelf the first morning and barely moved for 3 days. He worked his way through Rachel's collection with the devotion of a pilgrim discovering sacred texts. Shakespeare. The complete works with notes in the margins in A Woman's Careful Hand, A History of the Roman Empire, Darwin's Origin of Species, medical text, star charts, maps of territories that might not even exist anymore. Ma, he said on the fourth day, looking up with eyes bright with something that might have been the tears. She wrote notes, in all of them, her thoughts on Caesar, on Hamlet's madness, on evolution. It's like she's still here teaching. Ruth looked at the book in her son's hands, at the faded ink, at words written by a woman she'd never meet, but whose home she now occupied. She would want them used, Samuel. Knowledge left unread dies twice. Nathan followed Jonah like a shadow, learning everything the mountain man would teach. How to check traps without losing fingers. How to read animal tracks in snow. The difference between elk prints and deer, between fox and coyote. How to gut a rabbit without puncturing the organs. The first time Nathan killed something, a young rabbit caught in a snare, he cried, stood there in the snow with the dead animal in his hands, and sobbed like he was 5 years old instead of 13. Jonah didn't mock him, didn't tell him to toughen up. He just put a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Good means you got a soul. You take a life, you honor it. Use every part, waste nothing. That's how we show respect." Nathan nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Elias found charcoal in Jonah's workshop and began drawing. Page after page of images: the cabin at dawn, Esther playing with a half-wild barn cat she'd named Princess Jonah, teaching Nathan to shoot Ruth kneading bread by lamplight. He didn't talk much, but his hands spoke volumes. One evening he showed Jonah a drawing, the whole family around the dinner table laughing. Jonah studied it for a long time. "You got Jacob's expression perfect, like he's about to say something nobody asked him to say." Elias' rare words: "It's how I remember things. Pictures stay when words fade. You draw your pa every night so I don't forget his face." Jonah's voice was rough when he answered, "That's good. That's real good, Elias." Jacob appointed himself protector of the chickens, much to the disgust of Lucifer the rooster, a mean-spirited bird who seemed to take personal offense at the 9-year-old's presence. Their battles became daily entertainment. Abigail took over kitchen organization with the efficiency of a general planning a campaign. She cataloged every jar, every sack, every barrel, created systems for rotation, calculated how long supplies would last. "Ma," she said on the 5th day, "we got 47 pounds of flour left. 8 people, 3 meals a day, 90 days till spring thaw. That's 2,160 meals. That's good arithmetic, sweetheart. It's not enough. We'll need to ration bread every other day instead of daily." Ruth looked at her 7-year-old daughter with something like awe. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart, Mama. You just never had time to notice before." It was true. In Boston, rushing from factory to tenement to market, Ruth had barely seen her children as individuals. They'd been her responsibility, her burden. But here, in the enforced closeness of winter isolation, she was discovering who they actually were. And Esther, 4 years old and fearless. She adopted every living thing she encountered. Princess the barn cat, an injured fox kit Jacob found. Even Lucifer, though the rooster refused to be tamed. Every night she insisted Jonah tuck her in, tell her a story. He'd started awkwardly uncomfortable with the ritual. But by the end of the first week, Ruth would find them in Esther's room, the little girl curled against Jonah's side while he told stories about Bear Bridger, speaking in third person about his own adventures tamed down and made safe for young ears. And did Bear Bridger eat the little girl? No, little one. Bear Bridger protected her. Bears protect their families. Am I your family now? A pause long enough that Ruth, listening from the hallway, held her breath. Yes, Jonah said finally. Yes, you are. Isaac remained watchful, still suspicious, still positioning himself between his family and this stranger they now live with. But the sharp edges were softening. Ruth noticed it in small ways. The stiffness leaving his shoulders when Jonah praised his work with the horses. The questions he started asking about ranching, about land, about building a life in Montana territory. One morning she found them in the barn, Isaac mucking stalls while Jonah repaired tack. My pa worked in a factory, Isaac was saying, 14 hours a day, came home too tired to talk, too tired to teach us anything. Then one day, the boiler exploded and he just wasn't there anymore. Jonah's hands stilled on the leather he was mending. I'm sorry. I don't want sympathy. Isaac struggled for words. I want to be someone my brothers can count on. Someone who knows things, who can provide. You already are that. You kept your family alive for 2 years. Most men twice your age couldn't have done it. Isaac looked up, surprise clear on his face. But, Jonah continued, if you want to learn ranching, I'll teach you. As partners, not as master and apprentice. This land's too big for one man. Could use help from someone I trust. You trust me. You've been watching me for a week, looking for any sign I might hurt your mother or your siblings. That's exactly what a man does. Protect his family first, trust second. Yeah, Isaac, I trust you. Something passed across the boy's face. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. The moment when a child realizes an adult sees them as more than just a child. From the doorway, Ruth wiped her eyes and slipped away before they could see. The wolf in sheep's clothing. Week 2 on the mountain. Ruth was rolling pie crust when she heard the hoofbeats. Not one horse, multiple riders coming up the mountain road. She went to the window. 3 men on horseback moving slowly, deliberately. Surveying. Jonah was already at the door, rifle in hand. Stay inside. Who are they? Don't know, but they ain't here for a social call. Ruth watched him walk onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. The riders stopped at the property boundary. Didn't cross. Just sat there on their horses, looking. Assessing. After 10 minutes, they turned and rode away. That night, Jonah told her the truth. Found tracks yesterday. 2 riders, maybe 3, circling the property. They didn't come close to the cabin, but they were watching. Clayton. Most likely. Ruth's hands clenched. What does he want? Jonah was quiet for a long time. They were alone in the kitchen, children asleep upstairs. The fire had burned low. I should have told you sooner about what he really wants. The silver. His eyes snapped to hers. How did you know? I heard whispers in Copper Bluff before you came. She folded her hands on the table, keeping her voice steady. Is it true? Is there silver on this mountain? For a long moment, Jonah didn't answer. He stared at his hands, those massive, capable hands that had built this cabin and carried her daughter through a storm. Yes, and the word dropped between them like a stone. I found it 8 years ago, vein running through rock about 2 miles north of here. Richest deposit I've ever seen. His voice was hollow. I never touched it, never told anyone. Rachel was already gone by then. Joshua, too. What did I need silver for? Couldn't bring them back. But Clayton knows. He suspects. There's been rumors for years. Prospectors poking around finding traces. Clayton's been buying up land and all through the territory. Anywhere silver might be. Jonah's hands clenched. He made me an offer 5 years ago. Wanted to buy Thunder Ridge for $3,000. I refused. And now he's found another way to pressure you. Jonah looked at her. You, your children. He'll claim I stole you from him. Claim the debt you owe his company gives him rights over you. He'll use the law or what passes for law in these parts to take everything. Ruth absorbed this. The fear was there, cold and familiar. But something else rose alongside it. Anger. Hot and clean and clarifying. So I'm leverage. No, Jonah stood, voice sharp. You're not property. Not to me. Never to me. I understand what I am, Jonah. A pawn in his game. You're not understanding. He stepped closer. I didn't bring you here as leverage. I didn't bring you here because of the silver or Clayton or any of that. I brought you here because... He struggled with words that didn't come easily. Because when I saw you standing on that platform, I saw someone worth saving. Not saving like a damsel in distress. Saving like a fire that's almost gone out. You just needed kindling, space to burn again. Ruth's vision blurred. Your children. Every one of them. They're not bargaining chips. They're not debt to be collected. His voice roughened. They're children. And children deserve safety. Deserve a home. He stepped even closer. I failed my son. Couldn't keep him safe. But I swear to you, Ruth Mackenzie, I will die before I let Clayton take yours. The tears fell then. She couldn't stop them. 2 years of holding everything together, of being strong because no one else could be. And now this man, this stranger who'd become something more, was offering to carry the weight. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? Jonah reached out. His hand, rough and calloused, cupped her face with unbearable gentleness. Because you reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting. They stood like that, frozen in a moment that balanced on the edge of something neither was ready to name. Ruth could feel his heartbeat through his palm, steady as a drum. Then footsteps clattered on the stairs. Nathan's being a pain. Isaac stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved from his mother's tear-streaked face to Jonah's hand on her cheek. Something complicated passed across his features. Jonah stepped back. Your mother and I were discussing supplies. Storm might be coming. It was a clumsy lie. Isaac clearly didn't believe it, but he was 17, old enough to recognize when adults needed their fictions. Nathan's being a pain, he repeated. Abigail says if someone doesn't stop him, she's going to smother him with a pillow. Ruth wiped her eyes, forcing a shaky smile. Tell her no smothering until after breakfast. Isaac almost smiled, almost. He turned to go, then paused. Mr. Bridger, Jonah, whatever's happening, whatever trouble is coming, I want to help. Jonah regarded the young man for a long moment. Then he nodded. We'll talk tonight, after dinner, man to man. Something shifted in Isaac's stance. He stood a little taller, a little straighter. Yes, sir, I mean yes. He disappeared up the stairs. Ruth listened to his footsteps, then turned back to Jonah. Man to man, he's earned it. He has. Thank you for telling me the truth about the silver. Jonah looked at her, and for just a moment the stone mask cracked. She saw beneath it, not a mountain man or a legend or a beast, just a man, lonely and afraid and hoping desperately that he hadn't made another mistake. You deserve the truth. Should have given it to you from the start. I'm sorry it took this long. Then he was gone, out to check the fence line, to double the watch, to prepare for the war that was coming. And Ruth was left with flour on her hands and the taste of tears on her lips and a heart that was beginning to beat in a rhythm she had forgotten. The campaign of terror, the poisoned water, came first, mid-December, just 2 weeks after they'd arrived. Jacob was feeding the chickens when he found 3 dead, convulsing, white foam at their beaks. Jonah's face went hard when he saw them. He and Isaac traced it back to the creek diversion that fed the chicken trough. 100 yards upstream, they found white powder residue on the rocks. Strychnine, Jonah said, used for wolf poisoning, lethal to anything that drinks. Isaac's face went white. Esther drinks from the house pump every morning. It connects to the same creek. Lucky the chickens got to it first. They spent the next day finding a new water source, testing everything, installing filters. The children asked questions Ruth had to answer without lying. Someone doesn't want us here, she told them. They tried to poison our water supply. Are we going to die? Jacob asked, scared. No, because we're smarter than whoever did this, and we're together. But that night, alone with Jonah, she asked the question that terrified her. How far will he go? Jonah's silence was answer enough. The cattle stampede came a week later. Late December, now 3 weeks on the mountain, 2 in the morning. Jonah woke to horses screaming in the barn. He grabbed his rifle and ran. In the lower pasture, he saw torches. 4 riders driving cattle toward the cliff edge. He fired a warning shot. The riders scattered, but the damage was done. 2 cattle over the cliff dead. 1 calf injured badly enough that it had to be put down. Isaac, Nathan, and Samuel helped. First time they'd seen death up close like that. First time they'd seen Jonah kill even as mercy. The fence post bore a message. Note pinned with a knife. Leave or lose everything. No signature. None needed. The children's fear was palpable now. Abigail had nightmares, woke crying about men with torches. Esther wouldn't leave Ruth's side during daylight hours. Nathan wanted to ride down and shoot Clayton right now. Isaac, older and wiser, understood the stakes. We can't win a fight against him. He has money, men, the law on his side probably. Jonah taught the older boys to take watch shifts anyway, 4 hours each, rotating through the night. Ruth protested. They're children. They're targets. Better they know how to watch their own backs. He was right. She hated it, but he was right. The supply theft came the fourth week on Thunder Ridge. Early morning a week before Christmas. Abigail went to collect eggs. The hen house was empty. Every chicken gone, including Lucifer. The root cellar showed signs of forced entry. 20 pounds of flour stolen. Most of the salt pork. Ruth and Samuel redid their calculations. We're now 25 pounds of flour short. That's 15 days of bread. We can supplement with game, but winter hunting is unreliable. Starvation was now a real possibility. But it was Isaac who made the discovery that changed everything. Checking the perimeter, he found hoof prints. Fresh, multiple riders. Following them to a ridge overlooking the cabin, he found a campsite. Remnants of a fire. Tobacco. Evidence that 2 or 3 men had been watching the property for days. He came back running. They're not just attacking. They're studying us. Learning our patterns. We have a spy problem. That night, against Jonah's orders, Isaac took a rifle and followed the tracks at dawn, 2 miles east to a ridge camp. He hid in the rocks and watched, listened. 3 men, armed, professional, and their conversation made his blood run cold. Ashford's getting impatient, the first man said, wants them gone before Christmas. That mountain man ain't scared, a second replied. We poisoned his water, ran his cattle, stole his food. He still dug in. Ashford says, next step, burn them out. The hay shed first, see if that loosens him, if not the cabin. A third man, older, I signed on to scare folks, not murder women and children. You want your $200 or not, Ashford pays for results. There's a line, boys. I ain't crossing it. Then you're out. Ashford's bringing more men anyway. Sheriff's on payroll, paperwork's ready. Either Bridger sells or Bridger hangs for kidnapping. Woman and brats go back to Copper Bluff in chains. Isaac had heard enough. He raced back to the cabin, burst through the door. Jonah Ma, they're planning to burn us out. Everyone froze. He explained everything. The timeline before Christmas 1 week away. The escalation, hay shed then cabin if needed. The scope Clayton had bought the sheriff, had legal traps prepared, had multiple hired guns on a systematic plan. The family crisis meeting happened in the sitting room. All 9 present, even Esther, though she didn't understand. Jonah laid out options. We can sell, leave, start over elsewhere. We can fight, but that means bloodshed. Likely some of us won't survive. Or we try to outmaneuver him, use the law he's trying to use against us. Ruth pulled out her contract, the original. I still have this. He's been lying about additional debts. Samuel, thoughtful. Do we have proof Ashford's behind the attacks? No, hired men won't testify against him. Then we need different leverage. Jonah hesitated. There's one thing Clayton wants more than driving us off. The silver. If I offered to cut him in, share the claim. No. Ruth's voice was sharp as broken glass. Ruth, no, you give in to a bully, he never stops. We fought too hard to get here. This is our home. We don't negotiate with him. We beat him. The children's voices rose in agreement. Ma's right. We run. Now we'll always be running. There has to be a legal way. Clayton's committed crimes. We just need someone to believe us. Jonah looked at this family, his family now, and he nodded slowly. All right, we fight, but we fight smart. Hearts in the darkness, what that evening after the children were in bed, Ruth stood in the kitchen kneading bread. The rhythm helped her think. Flour, fold, press, turn. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind was chaos. Jonah entered quietly, watched her work. You don't have to do that tonight. You're exhausted. The rhythm helps me think. He sat at the table, unusual for him. Normally he paced or worked. What are you thinking about? Ruth continued kneading. I'm thinking about how a month ago I stood on a platform being rejected by 47 men, told I was too fat, too poor, too much. And now I'm standing in this kitchen, in this beautiful home, with 7 children who are finally settling, preparing to fight a war against a man who wants to destroy us. She looked up at him, flour on her hands, on her face hair escaping its pins. I should be terrified, but I'm not. I'm angry. I'm angry that Clayton thinks he can take this from us, from you, after you've lost so much already. Jonah stood, crossed to her, took her flower-covered hands in his. Ruth Mackenzie, you are the fiercest woman I've ever known. Not because you're not afraid, but because you're afraid and you stand anyway. His voice broke. Rachel was brave in her own way, gentle brave. She made this cabin a home with kindness. But you'd burn the world down to keep your children safe. And he struggled. I love you for it. Ruth's breath caught. What? I love you. Clearer now. Certain. I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't think I could feel this again. But watching you stand up to Clayton, watching you with your children, watching you take up space in this cabin like you were always meant to be here. You're not too much, Ruth. You're exactly enough. Tears streamed down her face. Jonah, I can't lose you. I can't bury another man. She couldn't say it yet. He cupped her face. Then we make sure I don't die. We're smart, we're careful, and we have something Clayton doesn't. What's that? A family worth living for. He kissed her, flower and all, gentle first, then deeper. 2 years of loneliness meeting 12 years of grief. When they parted, she whispered, I can't call it love yet. Not out loud, not after Thomas. I know. I'll wait. But Jonah, stay alive. Stay alive and maybe someday I can say it back. Deal. From the doorway unnoticed, Isaac watched. His mother and this man, foreheads together, her hands on his chest, his arms around her. The boy's thoughts were complicated. This man isn't my father. Will never be my father. But Pa's been gone 2 years, and Ma hasn't smiled, really smiled since the factory took him. She's smiling now. Isaac deliberately cleared his throat. Ruth and Jonah sprang apart. Sorry, needed water. He filled a cup from the pitcher, turned to leave, stopped. Jonah, whatever happens with Clayton, whatever you need me to do, I'm with you. Isaac, Ma deserves to be happy. You make her happy. That's enough for me. He left before emotion showed. Ruth, after his footsteps faded. He knows. Yes. And he's accepting it. Your boy's growing up. Too fast, they all are. War's coming and it's making them into adults before they're ready. We'll end it before it gets that far. Hellbog, still working on that part. The Fire and the Blood, week 5. 2 days before Christmas. The family was returning from a walk to the frozen creek when they saw the smoke. Something's burning, Samuel said. A column of gray rose from the direction of the lower pasture. The hay shed. Jonah set Esther down immediately. Get everyone to the cabin, bar the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me. What is it? Ruth's voice was sharp. The hay shed. Someone's torched it. He was already moving. Stay with the children. Jonah, Ruth, please. He turned and his face was hard as the mountain itself. I need to know you're safe, all of you. Can you do that for me? She wanted to argue, to go with him, to stand beside him, but 7 pairs of eyes looked to her for guidance. Go. We'll be fine. He kissed her forehead. Then he was gone, mounting his horse, riding toward the smoke. Inside the cabin, Ruth gave orders. Isaac barred the door. Samuel watched from the upstairs window. Nathan and Elias keep the little ones calm. They waited. An hour passed, then 2. Ruth paced, prayed, counted her children again and again. Then hoofbeats, one rider moving slowly. Isaac looked out. It's Jonah. Ruth ran to the door, threw back the bar, pulled it open. Jonah stood on the porch, covered in sweat. Exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Blood soaked through his shirt, spreading from somewhere beneath his coat. The hay's gone, he said, all of it. We'll need to stretch the feed through winter. I don't care about the hay, Ruth's voice cracked. You're bleeding. Few scratches, nothing serious. She reached for him and her hand came away red. That's not scratches. He swayed slightly, found a note, pinned to a fence post. Clayton wants a meeting, tomorrow noon, Old Mill Road. And if you don't go, then he comes here. Jonah's knees buckled. Ruth, I need to sit down. She caught him. Isaac was there instantly, ducking under Jonah's other arm. Together they half carried him inside. Samuel, get water boiling. Abigail, find clean cloth for bandages. Nathan, watch that door. Jacob, keep the little ones calm. The children scattered to their tasks. Ruth and Isaac helped lower Jonah onto the bench by the table. We need to get his coat off. The wound was worse than Jonah had let on. A deep gash across his ribs still bleeding. Not lethal, but deliberate. A message written in flesh. Ruth cleaned it with hands that didn't shake. She'd done this before for Thomas when he'd come home from the factory hurt. This needs stitching. There's a kit in the chest by my bed. I know how to stitch a wound, Jonah. Thomas didn't always make it home in one piece either. Something passed between them. Shared knowledge of what it meant to love someone in a dangerous world. Isaac brought the kit. Ruth threaded the needle, sterilized it in whiskey, and set to work. Jonah didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but his hand found hers when she finished, and he held on like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. You should have told me it was this bad. Didn't want to scare the children. The children are tougher than you think. They've had to be. He looked at her, soot still streaked his face. Pain had drawn lines around his eyes. But beneath all of it, she saw something else. Tomorrow, he said, the meeting. You're not going alone. I have to. If I don't show, he'll come here. I won't risk your children in a fight. They're your children too now. The words came out before she could stop them. Jonah went very still. What? You feed them, teach them, protect them. You held Esther through a storm and talked to Isaac man to man. You let Samuel borrow books that belonged to your dead wife. Her voice shook. You've been more of a father to them in 5 weeks than most men are in a lifetime. So don't tell me they're just my children. They're ours now, whether you meant for that to happen or not. The cabin was silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Then Jonah lifted his free hand and cupped her face. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I'm glad it did. He kissed her, gentle, careful. The kiss of a man who'd forgotten how to hope and was remembering. When they parted, she was crying. Tomorrow, we face it together. Ruth? That was the deal. Remember, you don't get to change the terms now. He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Together. From the doorway, unseen by either of them, Isaac watched. His face was unreadable, but his hand rested on the rifle Jonah had taught him to shoot. Whatever came tomorrow, the Mackenzie children would not let their mother face it alone. The night passed slowly. Ruth sat by Jonah's side through the long hours, watching the rise and fall of his chest, counting breaths like prayers. The wound had stopped bleeding, but the blood on his shirt was a reminder of how close she'd come to losing him. Dawn came too soon. Gray light filtered through the windows. A new day, the day of reckoning. Ruth stood stretched, muscles stiff from sitting, looked down at Jonah still sleeping. Today, she thought, today we end this. She went to wake her children, to tell them the plan, to prepare for the war that had been building since the moment Jonah said her name on that frozen platform. The mountain was quiet, waiting. Even Thunder Ridge itself seemed to hold its breath, knowing that what happened today would determine everything. Ruth Mackenzie, the fat widow no one wanted, was about to remind Montana Territory what it meant to stand when the world said fall. The night before, Ruth didn't sleep. She lay in the big room at the end of the hall, the room that had been Rachel's, staring at knots in the pine ceiling and counting them like rosary beads. Tomorrow could end with Clayton defeated and her family safe, or it could end with Jonah dead, her children, scattered, everything they'd built, turned to ash. She thought about Thomas, how he died suddenly, no warning, no goodbye, just a factory foreman at the door with his hat in his hands, saying there had been an accident with the boiler. How she'd stood in their tenement apartment with 7 children and $17 and no idea how to survive. She couldn't do that again. Couldn't bury another man she cared about. Couldn't stand over another grave while the world told her to be strong. A knock on the door. You awake? Yes, Jonah entered, moved to sit on the edge of the bed. Can't sleep either. I keep thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. Me too. They sat in silence. The cabin creaked around them, settling into the cold. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. Jonah, if something happens to you tomorrow, it won't. But if it does, she sat up facing him in the darkness. I need you to know that you gave me my life back. You gave my children a home. Whatever happens, that matters. You matter. His hand found hers. When this is over, when Clayton's gone and we're safe, I'm going to marry you proper. Preacher witnesses vows. The whole thing. Is that a proposal? It's a promise, right? She pulled him down beside him. They lay together clothed above the covers, propriety maintained, but holding each other until the sky began to lighten. Not speaking, just breathing, just being alive together for whatever hours remained. When dawn came, Ruth made breakfast while Jonah checked weapons. The children woke one by one, sensing something different in the air, the quiet before thunder. Isaac was the first to notice. Ma's wearing her good dress, the one Jonah had given her made from Rachel's fabric, blue wool with small buttons. Where are you going? Ruth turned from the stove. To end this, with Jonah. Then I'm coming. No, Ma, I can shoot. He taught me himself. Your job is here. Ruth took her son's face in her hands, protecting your brothers and sisters. If Clayton's men come while we're gone, you're the only one who can stop them. Isaac's jaw worked. Tears he would never admit to shone in his eyes. What if you don't come back? Then you take care of them like you always have. She kissed his forehead. But I am coming back, Isaac Mackenzie. We fought too hard to get here. I didn't survive Boston and that train and Clayton's auction block to die on some frozen road. A ghost of a smile. Yes, ma'am. The other children gathered for goodbyes. Samuel pressed a book into Jonah's hands. Shakespeare the Soldiers, the Courage passage marked. In case you need it. Nathan offered a knife. I sharpened it last night. It's not much, but it's plenty. Elias handed over a folded drawing. Jonah opened it. The whole family together, every face rendered in careful detail. So you remember what you were fighting for? Jonah's hand trembled as he placed it over his heart next to the first drawing Elias had given him. Jacob bounced on his toes. You're going to win right, beat the bad men, and come home. That's the plan. Keep an eye on those chickens. Don't let Lucifer get too uppity. Abigail and Esther stood together. The little one's face was pale, her eyes too large. Promise you'll come back, Esther whispered. Jonah knelt to her level. His scarred face softened in a way Ruth had never seen. I promise, little one. When I come back, we'll have dinner together and you'll tell me everything Princess did while I was gone. Deal. Deal. Esther threw her arms around his neck. He held her for a moment. This child who'd called him Bearman the first day they met. Then he gently handed her back to Abigail and stood. Ruth and Jonah walked to the horses in silence. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of cold that bit through clothing and settled into bones. Snow stretched white and pristine in every direction, broken only by the dark line of the trail leading down the mountain. I still say I should come alone, Ruth said as she mounted. And I still say no. Jonah swung into his saddle. Clayton wants to negotiate. If I go alone, he might actually talk. If I bring you, he sees a challenge, but if we both go, he sees we're united. That matters. They rode down the mountain, 2 hours through winter landscape. Little conversation, but their hands brushed when the horses walked close. Finally, Ruth spoke. Whatever happens today, I want you to know something. What's that? I'm glad you chose me. Glad you saw something worth saving when everyone else saw burden. Glad you gave my children a father when they'd lost theirs. Jonah's voice was rough. I'm the one who should be grateful. You brought life back to a dead house. Sound and chaos and all the things I thought I'd never have again. Then let's make sure we both survive to keep arguing about who's more grateful. He almost smiled. Deal. The old mill road appeared through the trees. Ruins of an abandoned sawmill stood like broken teeth against the white landscape. And in the clearing before it, Clayton Ashford waited. Part 3, the reckoning, the confrontation. 20 men on horseback, all armed. Ruth counted them as she and Jonah approached. Clayton sat at the center on his fine black horse, dressed immaculate as always. To his right, a man with a silver star pinned to his chest. Sheriff William Garrett looking uncomfortable in the cold. But it was what sat behind Clayton that made Ruth's breath catch. A wagon, heavy and enclosed, and inside it visible through the open back, a woman wrapped in blankets. Even from a distance, Ruth could see she was ill, terribly ill. Her face was pale as the snow, her body thin to the point of emaciation. She coughed into a handkerchief, and when she lowered it, Ruth saw the red stain. Blood. Jonah saw it too. His hands tightened on the reins. Ruth understood immediately. Clayton had brought his dying wife for a reason, as shield and witness both. If violence erupted, he could claim he was protecting Margaret. If negotiation worked, her presence would soften hearts, make them hesitate. It was strategic, calculated. The act of a man who understood that desperation made people do terrible things, but dying women made even hard men pause. Clayton's voice rang out across the clearing. "Mr. Bridger, Mrs. Mackenzie, how good of you to come." They rode forward, 2 against 20. Ruth had the shotgun Jonah had taught her to load. He had his rifle. Laughable odds, but they came anyway. "Let's be reasonable about this," Clayton continued. "No need for unpleasantness. Nothing reasonable about what you're asking." Jonah's voice was flat. "I told you 5 years ago, Thunder Ridge isn't for sale. Everything is for sale, my friend. It's simply a matter of finding the right price. The woman isn't a price. She isn't a bargaining chip. She's a person." "Ah, yes, Mrs. Mackenzie." Clayton produced papers from his coat. "Did you know your rescue was technically kidnapping? I have witnesses who saw Mr. Bridger forcibly remove you from a lawful auction." "I went willingly." "Did you? Or were you coerced by desperate circumstances? 7 hungry children facing debt repayment you couldn't afford." He turned to the sheriff. "I've filed charges, kidnapping against Mr. Bridger, debt evasion against Mrs. Mackenzie. The paperwork is in order." Sheriff Garrett shifted in his saddle. He was older than Ruth had expected, maybe 60, weathered face, tired eyes. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff William Garrett. Mr. Ashford has filed formal complaints. I'm here to execute lawful orders." Ruth's blood went cold. "According to these documents, you owe the mail-order bride agency $300 in transportation costs, administrative fees, and penalties for breach of contract. You're to come with me to Copper Bluff to settle the matter in court." "That's a lie," Ruth's voice cut across the clearing like a blade. Clayton's smile widened. "Strong words, Mrs. Mackenzie. Strong words for a strong lie." She urged her horse forward. Jonah stayed close, protective. "I signed a contract in Boston. I have the original right here." She pulled the folded paper from her coat. "It states my passage west was paid in full upon arrival, paid by whichever man chose to marry me. Jonah Bridger paid $500, 5 times the standard fee. That contract makes no mention of administrative fees, no mention of penalties, no mention of any additional costs whatsoever." Murmurs rippled through Clayton's men. Mr. Ashford invented those charges after the fact, when he realized he couldn't bully Mr. Bridger into selling his land. Sheriff Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Is this true, Ashford?" "Of course not. The woman is desperate. She'll say anything to avoid her obligations." "Then you won't mind if the sheriff sees the original contract filed with the mail-order bride agency in San Francisco?" Ruth's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Not your copies. The original." Clayton's face went from ruddy to pale. Ruth pressed harder. "You can't produce it, can you, because the original says exactly what I just told you. And if Sheriff Garrett sends a telegram to San Francisco to verify, he'll discover you've been committing fraud, using false documents to steal land from honest settlers." She looked at the assembled men. "How many others, Mr. Ashford? How many widows have you done this to? How many families?" The silence was deafening, then a voice from the wagon, weak, coughing, but audible. "Clayton, what is she talking about?" All eyes turned to the woman in the blankets. Clayton's face twisted with something like panic. "Margaret, you shouldn't exert yourself. The doctor said—" "What is she talking about?" The woman tried to sit up. Failed. "Fraud, false documents." Ruth looked at her. Really looked. This was Clayton's wife. The woman he was doing all this for, dying of consumption from the look of her. Months left, maybe weeks, and she had no idea what her husband had done. "Mrs. Ashford," Ruth said gently, "your husband has been using the law to force settlers off their land, manufacturing debts that don't exist, all to claim property he believes has silver on it." Margaret Ashford's eyes, fever bright, found her husband. "Clayton, is this true? It's for you." The words burst from him, desperate, raw. "The doctors in Switzerland, the experimental treatment, it costs $5,000. The silver on Thunder Ridge is the only way I can save you." And there it was, the truth beneath the cruelty, not greed, love, twisted and desperate and willing to destroy anything in its path, but love nonetheless. Ruth felt something shift in her chest. She saw herself in Margaret Ashford, saw what she might have become if Thomas's factory accident had left him dying slowly instead of killing him instantly. Would she have done anything to save him? Totally destroyed other families. She didn't know. And that uncertainty made her compassionate instead of cruel. Mr. Ashford, she said quietly, I understand what it is to be desperate, to have someone you love slipping away and feel powerless to stop it, but your wife deserves to live. My children also deserve to live. We can't be your sacrifice. She's dying. Clayton's composure finally shattered. His voice broke. Don't you understand? Without that silver, I lose her. I lose everything. And with it, I lose everything. Ruth met his eyes. Where's the math that makes one life worth more than 8? The question hung in the cold air. Clayton had no answer. Sheriff Garrett spoke. His voice had changed. Harder now. More certain. Ashford, I'm going to need to see those original documents. All of them. This is absurd. You can't possibly believe. I can believe whatever the evidence shows. The sheriff's hand moved toward his gun. And right now, evidence is showing me a man who brought 20 armed men to arrest a mother and her children over a debt that might not exist. He turned to his deputies. Start checking those documents. I want to see original signatures, agency stamps, everything. You can't do this. Clayton's horse pranced, sensing its rider's agitation. I have friends, important friends. The territorial governor is 1,000 miles away. Right now, I'm the law in Copper Bluff. Sheriff Garrett pulled out a notebook, his weathered hands steady on the pages. And I've been investigating your business practices for 8 months, Mr. Ashford, since April of last year. Ruth's eyes widened. 8 months. The sheriff had been investigating Clayton since before she'd even arrived in Montana. Multiple complaints, Garrett continued. 3 other families claiming sudden deaths after refusing to sell property. Land seizures following mysterious fires. Survey markers moved in the night. Always the same pattern, always the same man behind it. He looked directly at Clayton. I couldn't move without proof that would hold up when your expensive lawyers came calling. I couldn't act on whispers and suspicions. But Mrs. Mackenzie just gave me what I needed. Her contract, her testimony. These men you hired confirming they were paid to harass and intimidate. That's enough evidence to bring formal charges and hold you while we investigate properly. Clayton looked at the men he had hired. Don't just sit there, I'm paying you to. To scare folks, one of the older hired guns interrupted. Not to help you commit fraud, not to attack women and children. He lowered his weapon. I'm out. Do what you want, but I'm done. 2 others followed, then 3 more. Clayton's small army was dissolving. Cowards, you're all cowards. No, Ruth said. They're men with consciences, something you wouldn't understand. Then hoofbeats, new riders approaching from the north. Ruth turned. 4 figures on horseback, young, determined. Isaac in the lead, rifle raised. Behind him, Nathan with the pistol Jonah had given him. Behind them, Samuel and Elias clutching kitchen knives with white-knuckled determination. Her sons, her boys, armed and ready. Ma told us to stay at the cabin, Isaac called out. His voice carried across the clearing, steady despite his 17 years. But she also taught us that family sticks together. He rode to Ruth's side. We're not leaving. Ruth's heart stopped and restarted beating wild. Isaac, I told you to. Save it, Ma, we heard shouting. Thought you might need backup. Jonah looked at the boss, then at Ruth. Something passed between them. Pride mixed with terror, mixed with love so fierce it hurt. Clayton stared at the 4 armed children, and something in him broke. The smooth businessman vanished. What remained was a desperate man watching his world crumble. This is insane, they're children. Children who can shoot, Nathan said. There was almost joy in his voice. Jonah taught us. One of Clayton's remaining hired guns holstered his weapon. I ain't not shooting kids. I don't care what you're paying. He turned his horse and rode away. The last 2 followed. Clayton sat alone now, 20 men reduced to 1. His wife coughing blood behind him, his schemes exposed, his desperation laid bare for all to see. Sheriff Garrett moved his horse closer. Mr. Ashford, I think we need to have a long conversation about fraud, about extortion, about conspiracy to commit arson and assault, about bribing a peace officer. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. The sheriff gestured to his deputies. I've got witness statements, financial records showing payments to hired men, letters between you and land speculators, and now Mrs. Mackenzie's testimony and contract. He looked at Ruth with something like respect. Ma'am, you just gave me the final piece. The courage to move forward knowing I had a victim willing to stand up publicly. That matters more than you know. In a territory where rich men can buy silence, having someone brave enough to speak truth changes everything. Clayton's face had gone gray. You can't do this. Margaret needs that treatment. She needs a husband who's not in prison. Sheriff Garrett gestured to his remaining deputies. Take him. They moved him flanking Clayton's horse. He tried to jerk free. This isn't over. Do you hear me? I'll fight this. You'll be quiet and come peacefully, or I'll add resisting arrest to the charges. Margaret Ashford's voice came from the wagon. Weak but clear. Clayton, stop. He turned to her. Margaret, I was doing this for you. All of it. The silver would have saved. Nothing can save me. She coughed hard into her handkerchief. I've known that for months, but I didn't know you were destroying innocent people in my name. Tears streamed down her wasted face. I don't want to live if it costs other people their lives. I don't want that kind of cure. Margaret, let them go, please. If you ever loved me, let them go. The fight went out of Clayton Ashford like air from a punctured bellows. His shoulders sagged. His head dropped. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. The deputies led him away, his horse following theirs. Margaret watched from the wagon, and when her eyes met Ruth's, they held infinite sadness. I didn't know, she said. I swear I didn't know what he was doing. Ruth urged her horse closer. I believe you, Mrs. Ashford, and I'm sorry you're ill. I hope you find peace. Thank you, Margaret coughed again. Take care of your children. Don't let anyone take them from you. They're worth more than all the silver in Montana. I know. The wagon pulled away following the prisoners. Sheriff Garrett tipped his hat. Mrs. Mackenzie, Mr. Bridger, I apologize for the trouble. I should have moved faster. You moved when you had evidence, Jonah said. That's all anyone can ask. Merry Christmas. The sheriff smiled slightly. You folks enjoy the holiday. He rode away. His men followed. The clearing emptied. And Ruth sat on her horse, shotgun still in her hands, and realized she was shaking. Jonah was there instantly. Ruth, look at me. I almost killed a man today. You almost defended yourself. There's a difference, Udayaman. I stood in front of 20 guns with nothing but a contract in my voice. You did. He pulled her from her horse into his arms. You magnificent, terrifying, incredible woman. You won. We won, she corrected. The boys crowded around, Isaac and Nathan and Samuel and Elias all talking at once. Did you see their faces when we rode up? That one man went pale as snow. Ma, you were amazing. Can we go home now? I'm freezing. Ruth laughed. It came out half a thump. She pulled her sons close to this circle of fierce young men who'd ridden to her rescue. You disobeyed me. Yes, ma'am. You could have been killed. Yes, ma'am. Don't ever do it again. Isaac grinned. No promises. They rode home together. All 6 of them. The winter sun breaking through clouds, snow crunching under hooves. And behind them, Clayton Ashford rode toward his jail cell, his wife coughing blood in a wagon, the price of his desperation finally come due. Aftermath and healing. The cabin appeared through the trees like a promise kept. Smoke curled from the chimney. 4 small faces pressed against the downstairs window. The door burst open before they even dismounted. Jacob ran out without a coat, skidding in the snow. You're back. You're safe. Abigail and Esther followed, more careful but equally relieved. The little one launched herself at Jonah's legs. You didn't die. You promised you wouldn't die, and you didn't. He lifted her into his arms. Made a promise, didn't I? You did. Bears always keep their promises. Ruth watched Jonah's face crumble, watched 12 years of grief and loneliness crack apart under the weight of a 4-year-old's love. Yeah, little one, this bear does. That evening, after the children were fed and the story had been told and retold with increasing embellishment, From Nathan, Ruth found Jonah on the porch, their spot, where they'd stood so many nights watching the mountain and learning each other's silences. "We did it," she said. "You did it." Standing there with nothing but truth and courage. "We did it. Together." She took his hand. "That was the deal, remember?" He pulled her close. "Together." They stood as the sun set over Thunder Ridge. Behind them, through the cabin windows, they could hear the children. Jacob's endless questions, Nathan's dramatic reenactment, Samuel reading aloud to the younger ones, Elias sketching the day's events, Abigail organizing tomorrow's chores, Esther playing with Princess the cat. Life, loud and messy and chaotic and beautiful. "Jonah, yeah, will you marry me?" He went very still. "Then, I thought I already asked you." "You promised. I'm asking. Will you marry me proper with witnesses and vows and everything that makes it real?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Yes." She kissed him as the last light faded. And somewhere in the distance, Thunder Ridge rumbled. Not threatening, approving. The mountain was giving its blessing. Christmas Eve. Henry Crow Feather arrived 2 days before Christmas. Ruth heard the horse and went to the door, worried it might be more trouble. But the rider was an older man, weathered and wise, with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I hear you need someone to speak words over a joining," he said to Jonah. "Didn't ask you to come." "You didn't have to." Henry swung down from his horse, clasped Jonah's arm in the way of old friends. 12 years I've waited for you to remember how to live. You think I'd miss this?" The ceremony was simple. They stood on the porch as Christmas Eve sun rose, painting the snow golden pink. 7 children formed a semicircle. Henry Crowfeather stood before Ruth and Jonah, his breath steaming in the cold air. He spoke first in his own language, words that sounded like wind through pines, like water over stone, ancient words for ancient promises. Then English. "We are gathered to witness the joining of 2 souls, 2 people broken by loss who found healing in each other, 2 people who chose family over fear, who chose love over loneliness." Esther tugged on Abigail's sleeve. "Is this the part where they kiss?" "Shh, not yet." Henry smiled. "If anyone here objects to this union, speak now." Jacob started to raise his hand. Isaac elbowed him. "Don't you dare." Jacob lowered his hand. "Then we continue." Henry turned to Jonah. "Speak your truth." Jonah took Ruth's hands. His palms were rough, calloused, warm. "I spent 12 years alone on this mountain. Thought that was my punishment for surviving when everyone I loved died. Thought being alone was what I deserved." His voice caught. "Then you came. You and your children. Loud and messy and stubborn. You reminded me that surviving isn't enough. You have to live. I ain't good with fancy words, but I can promise you this: every sunrise I got left is yours. Every storm, every harvest, every quiet evening by the fire, all of it. You brought life back to a dead house, and I'll spend whatever time I have making sure you never regret it." Ruth's turn. She looked at this man who'd saved her, who'd seen worth where the world saw burden. "I spent my whole life being told I was too much, too big, too loud, too difficult. I believed it, made myself smaller, quieter, tried to take up less space." She squeezed his hands. "You didn't ask me to change. You just made room for all of me. Every pound, every flaw, every stubborn inch. You made me feel like I belonged." Her voice strengthened. "I love you, Jonah Bridger. I love you for seeing me when no one else would, for giving my children a father when they'd lost theirs, for teaching them that strength and gentleness can live in the same heart. I can't promise I won't drive you crazy. I can't promise perfect. But I can promise this: wherever you go, I'm beside you. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's the deal. That's always been the deal." Henry's eyes were bright. "Then by the power vested in me by friendship and common sense, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss." Jonah kissed her, deep and sure. The children cheered. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the ridge, even though the sky was clear. The mountain was celebrating. They had cake. Samuel played harmonica, a skill he'd taught himself from a book. They danced in the main room, clumsy and joyful. Jonah and Ruth's first dance as husband and wife, witnessed by 7 children and 1 Blackfoot elder and a half-wild cat named Princess. Esther proclaimed it the best wedding ever. Jacob asked if there would be more cake. Nathan and Isaac arm wrestled. Elias sketched it all. Abigail cried happy tears. And Ruth Mackenzie Bridger, the fat widow from Boston, stood in the center of her family and knew what it meant to be home. Spring comes. March brought thaw. Snow melted, revealing green shoots that pushed stubbornly through frozen ground. The creek ran high with meltwater loud and bright. Birds returned to the pines, filling mornings with song. Ruth stood on the porch watching her children scatter across the land. Isaac worked with Jonah in the far pasture, rebuilding winter-damaged fences. Not as hired hand and boss, but as partners. Equals. Nathan tracked rabbit prints toward the tree line rifle over his shoulder. He'd gotten good. Could hit a target at 100 yards now. Samuel sat under a pine tree lost in one of Rachel's books. The space between him and the other children no longer seemed like isolation. Just preference. Elias sketched wildflowers pushing through the last patches of snow. His drawings had become family treasure hung on walls preserved carefully. Jacob chased chickens, while Lucifer the rooster chased him back. Some things never changed. Abigail hung laundry on the line singing softly. Her voice had gotten stronger through the winter. Confident. And Esther played with Princess, her laughter carrying on the mountain wind. Home. The word had different weight now, different meaning. Jonah came up behind Ruth, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. She leaned back against his chest, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly. She hadn't told him yet, wasn't completely sure herself. But the signs were there, the nausea, the tenderness, the way her body felt different, claimed by something new. A baby, their baby, proof that dead things could bloom again if given enough time and care. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm happy. I forgot what that felt like." "Yeah, me too." They stood together, watching the mountain wake from winter sleep, watching their children run and play and grow on land that would sustain them for generations. From the pasture, Isaac's voice, "Jonah, we need help with this post." From the yard, Jacob's shriek, "Lucifer's got my boot again." From the tree line, Nathan's triumphant shout, "I got a rabbit, Ma. I got another rabbit." Jonah shook his head, but he was smiling. "Duty calls." "Always does." He kissed her once. Quick and sweet. Then he was moving toward Isaac's call. Ruth turned toward Jacob's crisis. The day swept them up in its demands and joys. But that night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Ruth sat by the fire with her husband and thought about the journey that had brought her here. A fat widow from Boston rejected by 47 men. A mountain man who'd turned himself to stone. 7 children who needed a home. They'd found each other against all odds. Built something beautiful from broken pieces. Proven that love doesn't care about the size of your body or the depth of your scars. Love cares about the size of your heart, the depth of your courage. Ruth looked at Jonah, this man who'd chosen her when no one else would. He looked back, and in his eyes she saw herself reflected. Not too big, not too much, just right, just enough, just loved. And she knew with absolute certainty that she would never doubt her worth again. Epilogue, The Legacy, 1956. The afternoon sun slanted across the Colorado porch. Isaac Mackenzie Bridger, 90 years old now, set down his whittling knife. The story was almost told. David sat forward, eyes bright with tears he was too young to hide. What happened to Clayton Ashford? He went to prison for 5 years. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy. Margaret died while he was locked up. Consumption took her in spring of 1884. When he got out, he came to Thunder Ridge. To get revenge. To apologize. Isaac's voice was soft with memory. Showed up at the door, hat in hand, asking for forgiveness. Asking if there was any work he could do to make amends. What did Jonah do? Gave him a charm, ranch hand. Clayton working for our family until he died in 1910. Became a friend eventually. A good man once the desperation was gone. David shook his head in wonder. People are complicated. They are. Enemies today can be family tomorrow if you let them. That's something your generation needs to remember. Isaac stood slowly, joints protesting, but still functional. He walked to the porch railing, looking out at land that 3 generations had worked. Jonah died in March 1912, spring of that year. Just went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. Ma followed him 6 months later. Doctor said heart attack. I think it was a heart that couldn't bear being alone again. That's so sad. It's beautiful. They got 28 years together. 7 children who all survived to adulthood, which was rare in those days. 43 grandchildren. 87 great-grandchildren. And now you, the great-great-grandchildren. All because one man saw worth where others saw burden. He turned back to David. You asked me earlier what I learned from them. Yes, sir. I learned that strength isn't never falling. It's standing up when everyone says you can't. I learned that family isn't born, it's chosen. And I learned that real love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about seeing someone imperfect perfectly. Isaac's hand found his grandson's shoulder, the same gesture Jonah had used with him 73 years ago. They're buried up on the ridge, side by side overlooking the valley. There's a bench there now. Your great-grandmother had it installed before she died. Can we visit? Tomorrow, I'll take you up, show you where it all began. The sun was setting now, painting the mountains purple and gold. In the distance, cattle lowed. A hawk circled. The world moved on the way it always did, indifferent to the stories that shaped it. But some stories mattered more than others. Some stories changed everything. 47 men said no to her, Isaac said quietly. One man said yes. And from that one yes, all of this was born. He gestured at the land spread before them. 7 houses where there had been one cabin. Smoke from 7 chimneys. Children playing in yards. Livestock thriving in pastures. Gardens where Ruth had once planted seeds. From one woman they called too fat. From one man they called too broken. From 7 children nobody wanted came this. David stood beside his grandfather. It's beautiful. It's proof. Proof that the world's wrong more often than it's right. Proof that courage and kindness matter more than Caesar's status or what other people think. Isaac put his arm around the boy's shoulders. You remember this story, David. And when you're my age, sitting on a porch with your grandchildren, you tell it to them. That's how we survive. That's how Jonah and Ruth live forever. I will, I promise. Good boy. They stood together as darkness fell, 2 generations separated by nearly a century, connected by a story of rejection and redemption, of a mountain that became home, of a love that saw beyond what the world could see. And somewhere in the distance, though it might have been imagination, thunder rolled across a ridge in Colorado that wasn't Thunder Ridge, but felt like it. A sound like God's own drum. A sound like blessing. The mountain remembered. The mountain always remembered.